All too often, player characters will find themselves fighting monsters simply because they are in the same place.
How dare you walk across this bridge?
How dare you walk across this bridge?
Sometimes these throwaway encounters can be fine. Perhaps the players are reacquainting themselves with their characters after a break or trying out some new abilities. What's an attack roll again? However, any random encounter will be far more interesting if the monsters have a goal beyond devouring the PC's innards like a bowl of tagliatelle. Now, I should point out at this point that I'm using the word monster as it's used in that most archetypal of bestiaries, the Monster Manual. That is to refer to the various animals, magical creatures, spirits, extraplanar beings, and non-human entities that the players can encounter whilst exploring their world. When I say the word monster, I don't necessarily mean a gribbly beastie. Grrr! Though I might do. My first suggestion is to include a little mistaken identity. What if the monsters think that the PCs are allies? Perhaps even allies who are in disguise and have been working undercover. This gives the PCs a number of options. They might simply use the monster's lack of knowledge to their advantage to get the drop on them and you have a fight. But more creative PCs might well think, oh, hang on, we're onto something here. We need to find out more about these infiltrators. What are they up to? I'm going to do another video soon about active versus passive players. And this sort of encounter where you give the PCs a plot hook that they may or may not pursue is a great way to get them to take charge and decide how they're going to deal with the situations that they encounter in their world. So, idea number 1, mistaken identity. Another idea is to have the monsters be fleeing from something. Now you have a number of options here. It might be that they've encountered some horrible danger that lies ahead for the PCs and the monsters are fleeing from it. The PCs could take advantage of the situation to finish off the already wounded monsters, but if they're a bit more astute, they might talk to the monsters to find out what is up ahead. Alternatively, the monsters might be facing a larger problem. Perhaps they're even refugees, forced to abandon their home and look for somewhere new. The player characters suddenly might see them as more sympathetic and not just want to attack the monsters, but possibly help them. There might be some self-interest in there because, well, anything that can displace this whole group of monsters might be a problem for the player characters too. But again, we have a situation where it's something a little bit out of the ordinary and more memorable than a standard encounter. Over time, the average adventuring party will kill a lot of monsters. What if the player characters are approached and asked to be the heirs to the empire? A group of monsters, the survivors of a previous encounter perhaps, now consider the player characters to be the de facto leaders of their tribe. This could be a really interesting cultural encounter where the PCs have to decide whether they simply say no and there's another fight, or perhaps they want to find out more about this new society where they potentially could be the rulers. What if they say no? Will the monsters accept that? Will they have some other system of working out a ruler? Will they be offended, hurt, upset? Again, it presents all sorts of interesting interactions between the player characters and the monsters. Player characters are not the only ones who explore. It would make complete sense that creatures that live underground, for example, or in a mountain or a huge deserted castle would want to know about their environment, so they would send people out to make maps and to explore. A situation like this is going to really change the monster's response to the PCs. Instead of wanting a fight, it might be that they decide to pull back because the PCs are now just an obstacle that they can go around and complete their mapping. Alternatively, the monsters might see the PCs as an interesting source of information. Perhaps there'll be some bartering of news. The two groups might be able to help each other. If the PCs can lay their hands on the map that the monsters are making, it will prove very valuable for navigating the local region. As a note to Dungeon Masters, this can also be a great way of helping out players who are floundering a little bit. They find a map, it directs them to certain places, and suddenly things are back on track. It's not subtle, but sometimes you do need to give them a helping hand. Another way to spice up a random encounter is to introduce the idea of there being a bounty on one or more PCs' heads. This is a nice reversal of the trope where player characters are offered a reward for each monster that they kill. Now, the reward might be specific to one of the PCs or perhaps the whole group because this is an old enemy who is still out to get them. Or it could simply be that there's a rising power in the area who is offering a reward for the heads of any pesky adventurers. This can be a great way of foreshadowing something that the PCs are going to encounter in the future. Introducing this into an encounter can be a great way to build up a little paranoia amongst the player characters. Suddenly all of the monsters that they encounter might have been sent to get them. Are they all part of this dreadful plot? The PCs will start to approach other encounters differently. It's not simply a case of being the full-on murder hobos that PCs sometimes are. They perhaps now need to observe or at least question the monsters that they encounter. What if one or more of the monsters that the PCs encounter has been sent out on some sort of rite of passage? Think Maasai warriors of old being sent out to kill a lion to prove that they are a brave. Or, for a more sci-fi reference, those scenes from Predator 2, where you have the predator going out to prove that he can take out the humans in a hunt. This would really change the rules of an encounter. The rest of the party, not the ones singled out to take part in the rite, could choose to involve themselves, but perhaps the rest of the monsters group would then get involved. Are they going to leave the PC who's been chosen as the lion to fight themselves? Again, this changes up an encounter and will make it something more memorable and something different for them to think about. What if the player characters find themselves in an encounter because they have something that belongs to the monsters, or at least the monsters think that they do? This straightforward option here is to have it be an item of treasure that the PCs recently managed to lay their hands on. Now, depending on how much you want to complicate things, it might simply be that the monsters have come to retrieve it. That would make an encounter more interesting, but would keep things very simple. However, what if the item has a more significant role than simply being treasure? What if the owner of the item would be able to unite a number of disparate tribes? This might cause trouble. Perhaps the tribes will then go to war, or perhaps the tribes are fighting amongst themselves, and if they had a clear leader, it would actually bring peace. If you give the PC something that could have a real effect, then they will have to consider carefully whether or not to hand it over to the monsters. Perhaps they will trade for it, but it gives them choices to make and again makes the encounter more interesting. There are a few final quick ideas that I just wanted to leave you with. What if the PCs find themselves in the middle of two different groups of monsters? They have the option of perhaps trying to get the two to fight, or will they side with one versus the other? Again, it gives them something to consider. What if the monsters that the PCs encounter are in some way possessed by a more powerful being, a lich or a mind flayer or an aboleth, one of the big nasty things? How do they react to that situation? Are they still okay to kill those monsters or not? And finally, what if the PCs encounter monsters that are cursed or infected with some sort of deadly disease? Are they going to risk becoming infected themselves? Are they interested in knowing what caused the disease, or not? Do they simply walk on? I hope the ideas that I've presented you with today will prove useful. If so, please check out some of my other videos. In the meantime, keep rolling.